And here we are. We are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Byrnes, and welcome back to the Leadership Book of the Month. Welcome, Bret and Dave.
Thanks, Kelly. Happy to be here.
Yay. So we'll get to our book in a minute, but we usually do a little update. Bret, any news? Anything going on?
I do. I really have some exciting news. Kelly's been kind of part of my journey here as this thing's been unfolding. But I took a position this last month as the Chief Operating Officer, COO at a local Kansas City company, Cavuzzo's Food Service. They're an independent broadline distribution company, which for those of you who aren't in the food service space are the people that move really products to restaurants from manufacturers. So a relatively large company, family owned, a little over 100 years in the business. So I won't turn it into a commercial, but just will say that the first 3 weeks have just been absolutely a whirlwind, and where I've benefited so much is everything that we talk about on the call. I'm applying the principles, the techniques, the concepts which we discuss, and to be able to really almost take the classroom, if you want to think of it that way, and apply it in a real world application. It's just been so gratifying because everything that we talk about, it really does happen that way. It really does work. So these aren't academic case studies that we talk about. These are real world examples. And, this month's book is exactly like that. So, it's really been interesting. That the really cool part about this is the CEO of the company is an extremely strong advocate for personal development, and he actually continues to listen to audio podcasts and audio books. And he obviously through our morning stand-ups, I shared with him what I was doing, and so he's been listening to the book along with me. So each morning when we come in, we spend a couple minutes updating one another on what's going on. And lately, our stand-ups have really evolved all around the book. So really been exciting to share that journey with him.
Yeah, that's really good. We should have invited him to come and join us today.
Didn't even think of that. We can probably do that. He really likes those things.
Yeah, and congratulations for your new role. It's exciting.
Thank you very much. I couldn't be happier.
We look forward to having more and more examples from your role as we have future books and discussions.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah. Dave, any news? What's your update? What's going on with you?
Nothing crazy going on in my world. Congrats, Bret. That's huge news on the new opportunity. And, what I think is really great. I too once worked for somebody that, we shared a lot of the same interests in reading, and just those, what you're describing, those 5-10 minutes every morning, when you're reading the same thing to kind of share different perspectives and the different value. That's so amazing. So I'm glad you're getting that, and congrats on the new opportunity. That's great news. I know you'll do well.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is exciting. I don't have any update either. I was trying to think of something.
Well, let me throw a few things out here. I had a couple more here. So, this goes back to our pregame, Kelly. We were talking about the different things, and the thing that entered my mind was Dave Ramsey. We've been doing this so long, just like Dave Ramsey, and then I thought of I can't. Her name's slipping me with the lady that does finance as well. They have standard answers. They've been doing it so long, and the people that call into their shows, they usually have the same challenge, maybe it's spun a little differently, but they go back to the same things, and that becomes kind of the benefit of reading the book. So I was in one of my ELT huddles here at the company, and I shared, that I read a lot in personal development and those kind of things, and that later that day, one of the people that's on the ELT sends me an email, and, oh, by the way, what book are you reading right now? And so I sent her back my title. And so then she sends me back a list, and it's all these titles that she's either read or has reading or in the on deck circle. So then, I exchange my reading list with her. And again, my point here is that, I've talked a little bit about how my blind spot in the 5 graces is empathy and, getting to meet people where they live. And I certainly want to improve on that. But just the fact that I'm reading a book and I had that as a talking point opened up this really what I thought a very personal, very vulnerable conversation with one of the members of our ELT that I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So the point here I make is that you just can't underestimate the value of reading, and, keep reading, keep investing in yourself. And it was one of those kind of ancillary benefits. The second point I wanted to make is this common theme of mentoring and networking. And boy, we've really beat that one up a lot in a very positive way. So again, I'm not a CEO by any stretch here, but I knew CEOs, and I said, you know what, I really have to kind of fall back on all the things we talk about. So I said, who could I task or tap to really be an executive mentor? And I had 2 friends that immediately came to mind. One of them is a retired president of a very, very large multi-billion-dollar company, happens to live right here in Kansas City. And I called him and I said, hey, this is the gig, right? I need a mentor and really looking for it. And I think you would be great. We have a phenomenal relationship. And he, sure, count me in. So I had a business problem solving method that I was looking for and sent him an email, and literally an hour later, I had pages of suggestions, and I thought, great.
Wow.
And then I had another CEO in Ohio who works with private equity, and he kind of just floats as CEO from the businesses that they acquire, and met with him via phone, of course, on Tuesday. And he's like, yeah, I'm happy to. So here's one guy's retired, one guy's an active CEO, and we all know the limited bandwidth that those positions allow. And both of them generously, I can't pay them, of course, generally said, yeah, absolutely, call me anytime. And again, what's the point here? The value of networking. And then I couldn't help but think of Dave's story from last month where he said, why did I correct the college student's paper? Because he asked.
Yeah.
And
at the store.
CEOs offer to be a mentor because I asked. So again,
nice.
You can't make this stuff up, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, a living, breathing example of personifying all the concepts and principles that we talked about. And, it sounds very simple, but they work. So if those of you who are on the podcast and listening and looking to better yourself, invest in yourself, I really can't stress this enough. Listen to what we're talking about. For the most part, we've all been there, done that, as the cliche goes. And these things really, really do have a positive impact on your lot in life. So again, I'm so excited.
Yay. And that really is why we do these, because the three of us could read books and just have conversations. But the reason we have the broadcast is to help the leaders of tomorrow invest in themselves today so that they're ready for that. Yeah. And it's, how many books have we read too that emphasize continuous learning, including the one for today? Mm-hmm. Right. I mean,
I think they all have some component of thread
some
to
way,
it.
Right. Yeah. So we are contributing to that and just a little bit of a way. So that's our contribution. And Bret mentioned your book of the your book list. It's over here. Hold on. I was going to show everybody. You can go to the voyagecg.com/leadership books, and that's the hub for this whole forum. And you'll see on the left side is a list of my favorite. All three of our favorite books are listed there, so you can grab those and go through. And they're all on separate lists. I could cull those and put them together, but I haven't done that before. So you can have access to all of our favorites there. And there also is a handout for today. I had trouble thinking about what to put on there because I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I don't know how many people use it, although I could look at the data, but I haven't. But I did put one quote from the book on there, and then there's just note pages and a place for you to have action items. So grab that if you would like. It's all on that same page. So
interesting segue. I was talking about, my associates reading list, and what I immediately went for was where were the overlaps and what were the similarities, and there were. Now, I think there were maybe 10, but just the fact that two people have nothing in common other than the fact that, we're both up and coming and aspiring professionals. We're both reading, and sure enough, we have, commonalities, and that, hey, 10 of the books on her list happen to be the 10 of the books on my list. And that was the very first time we'd ever had that conversation.
And now that gives you more to talk about next time you can grab coffee for 20 minutes and talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, that whole idea of empathy and grace, right? The 5 graces, meeting the employee where they live, meeting the associate where they live. And again, as you guys have heard, that is my blind spot, one of a few that I have. And boy, I am certainly committed to doing a better job in that space.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. You're improving already in it. I love it. So good. Okay, should we dive into this month?
Let's do.
CEO Excellence. So this book came out in March of 2022. And the reason that we picked it was it's called CEO Excellence, the six mindsets that distinguish the best leaders from the rest. And one of the reasons that I bought it was it's written by 3 of the senior level partners at McKinsey. And so in running a consulting firm myself, I don't have the resources that McKinsey has. So I use a lot of their research and a lot of their data. So I don't have to put all of that together. And some of what they put in here, they have published a lot of this research already. So it was great to see in this book. And I forgot what word you used in the pregame, Bret, but it's you didn't say heavy, but like there's a lot of information in here and a lot
Well,
of
we think of last month, we used the Five Graces, which was a
yeah,
very light book. It had great content. And
great
don't get me
content.
wrong, it was
Yeah,
very meaningful. But this one, this was a heavy piece of material.
yeah,
So we're talking about 300 pages with small font. And I don't know how everybody else reads, but I often find myself reading a paragraph, and then just to make sure that I get the author's intent or what the message is, I'm going back and reading that paragraph again. So this one was very deep, but very valuable. I
yeah,
don't want to short sell it in any way, because this is one for mid-level managers, junior executives, C-suite folks. This is a must read. And I know as we choose our topics and choose our materials, we try to cater to a broad audience, and we want to have material for everybody within their career journey. And this is one that really targets a lot of the upper level folks.
yeah. It's not as pretty as last month's book, that's for sure, with the font.
Yeah, well, I have a little meeting table in my office, and I can flip my computer around, but the centerpiece of that meeting table is the Five Graces.
Yeah,
And I can't
it's
tell you,
on my coffee table.
literally everybody that walks in here, that's the first thing that they do is grab that book and start leafing through it. So
nice.
It's definitely getting some mileage.
Dave, any general comments before we dig in?
Yeah, really being a data guy and working a lot in data science, what grabbed me very early on when the writers talked extensively about how they got to the list of CEOs that they studied. And, I would venture to say 90% of people would have stopped at the first iteration when they talked about, we got this list, and I can't remember how many they had, but their epiphany early on was, this is mainly white men, and we want some more diversity to this. And the great lengths that they went to ensure that they had a lot of diversity in the population of the data that they looked at. As a data science guy, I'm going, yes, 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 yes. I was loving every minute of that. And, what I also thought was very interesting was they made the comment about, excluding people that were, the founder of the company that came right into that CEO role. And having worked for both different types of organizations, it's definitely different when you look at some of these companies that, the CEO is the founder, and, are they still at the helm 20, 30 years later? And is that the best person to still be running that organization? And most experts would say probably not, because it's their baby, right? They grew it literally from nothing. So yeah, that's what really hooked me on the book, was them talking extensively about how they went through and ensured that they had a representative sample size. And to Bret's point, I think I read that section about 4 times. I'm like, okay, here's what they did next, and I'm guessing like you guys as well. I share some of this with my wife, and I'm getting very, very excited about how they captured the data, and she's just looking at me like, yeah, tell that to me at 10:30 tonight so I can get right.
I'll confess that was not one of the parts I read 2 or 3 times. But I was glad to see that.
Yeah.
I liked the book better than I thought I would. It wasn't as dry as I thought it might be. I thought the writing style was interesting. And the quotes and the stories, although like they shared a lot from Netflix, and I've read some of the books by the Netflix people and about Netflix as an example, but they had different things to say too. That wasn't just the same stuff that's out there already. So one little criticism was they talked about the CEOs. I think they said all of them have executive coaches. So as an executive coach and a consultant that works in this realm, they didn't refer to the models, like where the genesis of the models that they use. So they referred some to the coaches, but they like they mentioned, they didn't refer to it by name, but they talked about Ikigai. That's a thing out there. And that CEO, whoever it was that talked about it, didn't invent that. And so I felt like they should give credit to really the group that invented it. And so, but I don't want to go through all of those different examples of that, but that was just something I felt like in my field that I should point out. But okay, so the authors, I'm not going to do a big bio about them because they're 3 of the senior partners of McKinsey. So Carolyn Dewar and Scott Keller, they are the 2 that run the CEO excellence practice. So that's part of the practice in McKinsey. Carolyn has been there since 2000, And Scott has been with McKinsey since 1995. And then Vic has been there since the 80s. 35 years he's been there. So the interesting thing on that to me was how they all work together, and they've had time to work with and research hundreds and thousands of people. But it doesn't sound like they have held the senior level roles in a company other than McKinsey. And so I thought that was just something a little bit, something worth pointing out, that it's something clients have said to me that they appreciate that I have, and that gives me a level of empathy with how hard the job is that's different than just reading about it. And then as we go in, I wanted to point out, Bret, thank you for saying how this can apply to anyone. So if you desire to be on the upper level of the organization, even if you don't want to be the CEO, I think it's helpful for you to understand how you could help the CEO and the senior team. Or if you run a small business and not a big, huge company like most of the CEOs they refer to in here, this applies to the small businesses too. And at the end of each of the big chapters, at the big sections, I think at the end of the little chapters too, but periodically they tie it back into small businesses, and they'll say, if you run a small business, ask yourself these questions. And there's 5 or 10 questions there. So, even if we don't point that out, just know that it does apply. I think it applies to everyone, and anybody that works in a company should know this is what the senior team is looking at and what the board's going to be looking at. So, okay, so for our flow, this says the 6 mindsets that distinguish the best leaders. So we're just going to take them one by one, and just in the interest of time, we thought we would each share our favorite point, if we could narrow it down to one from each of the 6. And then each of the 6 had 3 chapters in the book, so it really is hard to narrow it down. So let's start with the first one. The first one, the mindset. And the mindset is be bold. So there's 6 mindsets that align with the 6 main responsibilities of a CEO. So the first responsibility is direction setting, and the mindset is be bold. So this is focusing on beating the odds, vision, strategy, and resource allocation. Be bold. What do you got, Bret? What's your favorite point?
I'll go quick because mine they're good. So the first one was make it about more than money. And you guys kind of know where this one goes, right? We've all taken positions at one point in our career just simply based on a paycheck or a raise. And then we got into the position and we found out that our values and our culture weren't aligned, and we were completely miserable. And I'm sure everybody's had that experience where they chased a $5,000 or $10,000 bump and they got into a position and they're making more money, but they're just not happy. So be very, very cautious about that. And the CEOs do that obviously across the entire enterprise. The second one is kill as much as you create, was the other point they had. And I won't go into the details of that, but basically what they're creating from the CEO level is a culture where it's okay to fail, right? And we're really not stretching ourselves. We're not growing. We're not doing the best for the business unless we occasionally fail. And we've talked a lot about, when you get real comfortable, you're probably not growing. And what I think this spoke to was the good CEOs, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the best of the best. All the CEOs that they surveyed, these are the best in class CEOs, create a culture and environment where it's okay to fail.
Yeah, that was good. And shut things down. Don't let it go on too long.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dave, what about you for Be Bold?
Mine was really kind of different. I reflected back when I was, in my early teen years. My grandpa actually owned a real small used car lot just a few blocks actually north of Rockhurst. And, a lot of people were kind of that lower, income bracket. And what he used to finance cars. And the thing he used to always do was get a credit report on them. And a lot of the people in that area didn't have good credit, so they couldn't get financed. And he just kind of made the decision, because the Be Bold kind of reminded me of this, where he said, you know what, I'm going to ignore the credit report. And I'm just going to really focus on what kind of dependable income these people have. And instead of monthly payments, we're going to do weekly payments with the agreement of, if you fall more than 2 weeks behind, I'm going to come repossess the car. And truth be told, we did repossess some cars, but about 80% of the people we found paid. They paid on the regular when their credit score would indicate it. Don't go do that. So, what happened was, some of his peers that own similar businesses in that part of town said he was absolutely crazy. And he said, well, I might be, but I'm going to do it anyway. So he found that he kind of grew a lot of business off of that. And several of them said, wow, I would not have done that, but what made you do this? And he goes, I just kind of trusted my gut and went out there and did it. So kind of weird, but that's what kind of struck me when I read those chapters, talking about being bold.
Yeah, I like it. Nice. Be bold struck me because that was my phrase for the year. And it came from Sister Donna Ryan, who some of our viewers might know. She was a nun in Kansas City for a really long time. And she was can you say badass if you're talking about a nun? But she was.
I think you just did.
She moved up to the mothership for the nuns a few years ago up to Omaha, and she passed away earlier this year. But she would tell me to be bold, and so this year I picked that as my phrase, and so I loved seeing that in here, and I liked the part of what they described in there was knowing what winning looks like. The best CEOs know. They're not guessing. So every once in a while, I get pushback when I really want the CEO to pick a vision, have a vision, and they don't want to go out too far. And they talk about you need to be able to predict the future or anticipate the future, and to see the downsides. But having that the North Star, having a vision is key. So be bold about that. Okay, so we all have ideas for more than one thing for each of these, but we're going to go and then we'll come back to if we have time at the end. So the next one of the responsibilities is aligning the organization. And the mindset, I think this was my favorite. It kind of touched my heart. Treat the soft stuff as the hard stuff. So Dave, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, Kelly, I got to agree. This was the section that really kind of struck me because I'm guessing we've all three of us and people that are listening have been in organizations where the leadership does not manage the culture of the organization. Mm-hmm. And, as I've heard, and we all have, either manage the culture or the culture will manage you. And wow, this one really got my attention, how they framed it of, treat the soft stuff as the hard stuff and, really put that emphasis on, are we a cohesive team? Do we fit well together? And, can we fix that if we don't fit well together? And the answer is we can sometimes. And I think 90% of leaders do a good job of trying to do that. Where I think we fall short is when we find that person or persons that you just simply can't coach to a better place, and making that tough decision of, this simply just isn't working out. I need you to find a new opportunity within the organization, or unfortunately, I'm going to manage you out of the organization. And we've all heard those expressions of, one bad apple, or it's poison in the well, and that sort of thing. And I've had some pretty rough experiences with that. So for me, this was the section where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm glad to see a book really kind of focuses on this. So we could all share a ton of stories, but yeah, if I could only read one section, it would be this one.
Yeah. And the thing is, and they kind of emphasize having those honest conversations. And I've written a lot about that in the last couple of months with quiet quitting and quiet firing now. Yeah. But they might have been the best in that role for a while and they're not now. And maybe the role changed or it's not needed. But they can still like the person and be nice to them on their way out, and even help them find the next role. And Absolutely. It doesn't mean, that there's something what you said about the one bad apple. They're going to turn bad if the conversations aren't honorable, because they'll get frustrated. And so have the conversation sooner. Brett, chime in.
So it sounds like radical candor. I don't know if this was a section had the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but that's kind of what I was thinking when Dave was speaking. So two parts here. The opening part of the section's got the reference to City Slickers and Jack Palance about the one thing. And immediately my mind went to our book that we profiled from Gary Williams. So I'm actually using that in an upcoming ELT huddle, but love that. And then I think we all kind of talked about it. There's a whole section on talent management. And boy, I really gravitated to that, because that is, in my opinion, one of the most challenging tasks that a CEO has, is building the bench, getting the right people on the bus, whatever term that you want to use. And, I even made a note here that talent management is probably a topic that we should find a book that speaks to that. We could devote an entire call to just simply managing talent, the best hiring practices. And again, I make the comment about that these are the best of the best in terms of CEOs. But I really, really like that part. The thing that kind of went through my mind as I was reading it, and I actually looked up the Roman philosopher who was quoted as saying, "Hey, luck is when you bring opportunity and preparation together." So as a leader, right, I can coach you up, I can prepare you, and we never know when that opportunity is going to present itself. I make the statement always and forever that the time that people are with me, I commit to them that I will making them better. And my expectation is that they commit to me that every day they'll bring their best. And I don't know, I think of it as an exchange. And I've told people that if you don't have a boss or you're not in an organization who's willing to make that commitment to you, you probably need to look for another organization. Because if you look at, what a supervisor, what a boss, what a CEO can do for you, right? And granted, we don't want to think that it's what they can do for you. That's really what it is. Hey, you're looking for the company to provide something for you other than just simply a livelihood. And if you have an organization or culture that's all you're getting, there's probably a better opportunity or there's a better fit out there. So that would be my reference or my recommendation to everybody, is just to say, hey, there are bosses out there that do that. There are CEOs out there that do that. There are companies that invest in you, whether it's tuition reimbursement, certifications, seminars, conferences, accreditations. And that's going to be the place where you're going to find your happy spot, where it's going to be the best fit.
Mm-hmm. And the research, not in this book, but there's research out there that talks about since COVID, that's what employees want right now. So that ties in exactly with what's happening out there. People want to have that development. One of my big takeaways in this one was start with the roles, not with the people. So our tendency is to look at who do we have, but instead it's really better to take the names out, look at the roles that are important and what are the top 5, 10, depending on the size of your organization. They're talking about 100, 200, 300 in some of the bigger companies, but look at the roles that are the most important and then the people. And that will help you avoid personal bias that you have towards certain people. Like, I love that guy and he's so fun and so sharp and he's worked here forever and we need to keep him on the team, but he's not great at any of these roles. So we need to really be thoughtful about the role, about the leadership role that he would be given. So that was one of my things that stood out about that. But again, I could talk just about that chapter forever and ever. Okay, the third, I haven't mentioned to the people, if you're watching live, you can post comments to us and I think they'll come up, we could see, but we won't be able to write comments back. So if you have a question for us or you have a thought to chime in, if you've read the book and you're watching, please chime in and let us know. And for those watching later, we will look forward to your comments on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Okay, the third responsibility of a CEO is mobilizing through leadership. And so the mindset is, this was good too, solving for team psychology. So Bret, you want to kick this one off?
Sure. There was 2 parts that I really focused on. One was do work that only the team can do, which is another way of saying focus your resources. We have a limited number of people, we have a limited number of finances, so we've really got to focus those resources. And I went back to a member of my capstone team in business school, and he happened to work for a local company, a very large company actually. And their general rule was that if what their initiative or project was didn't generate a 2% impact on their net income, that it really wasn't worth doing. Now, that's a general rule, but you could see within their organization, they'd established a culture where they had to evaluate projects and they had established a threshold. So, and it's kind of like the term you see here, we can't boil the ocean kind of thing. So I really, really thought that was a very disciplined approach. The other thing that I was thinking of, Dave, when I read this one, the quote there from Deming that says, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And in my first 3 weeks here in the business, I probably said it more times than I can all remember, that slow is fast and fast is slow, and bring me data and we'll make data-driven decisions. So I could say this about every chapter in the book. This chapter really resonated. Well, they all resonate. This is a really, really good book, folks. So those were my thoughts on that particular section.
Dave, did you fall in love with this chapter when you saw that quote at the top?
Oh yeah. That definitely got my attention. I always love books that kind of give you that quote at the beginning, because for me, a well-selected quote will kind of set the tone for the chapter or the section. So yeah, definitely got my attention. And what this kind of reminded me of was, two things that interrelated was when I made my kind of early step into management, the director I worked for, one thing he always did was every year he pulled all of his management team offsite, usually in his living room, and we would go through a start, stop, continue exercise. So every manager would have to bring every single project that they were working on, that they'd planned to work on in the coming year, and we would collectively make the decision: would we continue to do these things? Which of them would we stop? And which new things did we need to start? And that very much reminded me of a book I read a million years ago, kind of Jack Welch from GE, his kind of biography, talking about when he was growing GE, he kind of had the mindset of we will be number one or number two in every one of our business verticals. And if not, we're going to buy, sell, or close. So if we're not one or two, we're going to buy something to get us into number one or number two. If we can't do that, we're going to sell it. Or we're simply just going to stop doing it. So that's what really kind of stuck out to me in this chapter, was those two things kind of connected to what I used to do. So very good stuff.
Yeah. My main takeaway was that law of triviality. So it kind of ties in with what Bret talked about. They talked about in the book that the best CEOs focus more on how the team is working together, not on the minutia of what they're doing. Yeah. And the law of triviality, they shared that from 1958, a study, the executive team was gathered to make one decision was a $10 million decision. Mm-hmm. And they made that in like 2 minutes. Another one was deciding a color to paint something on their campus. And that one took like 45 minutes. And then they had which coffee maker we should buy. And that was like a $20 decision, and it took days and days and days. And so the whole point of, I think that's a pretty good exercise to think of, are we doing the $1 billion decisions, painting decisions, or the coffee maker? Yep. And where are we spending our time? And I've certainly been in organizations where they spent a lot of time getting input from everybody to make a decision that really one person should be able to make. Mm-hmm. And I forgot what they called that too. Oh, no, that's coming up in a different section. So obviously that applies to small businesses as well. So being very careful about what you're working on and making sure that a lot of times when the small business owner, they wear a hat, they wear all the hats, and then they hire other people and give them some of the hats, then they're focused more on the hats instead of how the team is interacting and getting along, and how they're working together, not just what they're working on. Okay, the fourth one is board engagement. So engaging the board, and the mindset is helping the directors help the business. So that was really good too. Mm-hmm. Right, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I haven't interacted with the board, and I actually had to reflect on this one a little bit because this was all new material to me. So I think in my entire career, I've been to 2 board meetings in previous positions, and more just as an observer rather than a participant. The part that I took out of this section that I really thought was applicable even beyond boards was this idea of full transparency. And as you read this, you kind of really focused on the relationship between the CEO and the board members, the chairman of the board, the individual board members themselves. So, my takeaway was this idea of choosing radical transparency was what the term that they used. And the way I felt about it, we can have transparency between our spouse and our partner, our family, our customers, our supervisor and subordinate. I report to the CEO, and, if I'm going to be passive aggressive or not, completely disclose the good or bad, obviously that's not a healthy relationship. And my final point that I made in my script was, hey, bad news doesn't get better with time. Let's get it out on the table. Mm-hmm. Let's evaluate it. Let's create an action plan, and let's get back to making money and doing good things. So that was my piece. I know that doesn't really apply to the board, but again, in my role, not having a tremendous amount of experience with a board, that was my takeaway and how I found value in that chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that does tie in with what they talked about, because if you I know they said at the beginning of it, when in doubt, share it. If you're thinking, should I tell them? Should I not tell them? Should I keep it quiet in case nobody will find out? People will find out, and then it's worse if the board finds out later. Dave?
Well, we talk a lot about soft skills, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness. And again, I have to confess, as a younger individual, I probably didn't possess those skills. And as I've aged and become, more seasoned, those things come, call them wisdom, call them what you want. But, and I'm always fascinated by these young leaders that are in their early 20s and early 30s and have these skills. And you just wonder, were they mentored by a parent? Did they have a boss or supervisor? But, I so wish I could go back and undo so many of the things that I did in my earlier life.
Yeah.
But, I kind of got to deal the cards that I was dealt, and just happy to have been able to sharpen the skill at this age and really not miss an opportunity. But really, really fascinated by some of these young leaders about how they acquire that skill set at such a young age.
Mm. And good mentoring from the board. Dave, what
Absolutely.
are your thoughts on the board?
Yeah, so kind of even less so than Bret, I've had very, very little experiences with boards, real small, kind of health department type things. So not quite the same. But what this reminded me of reading this section was I had a really good leader early on in my career where I would go in and give my regular updates. And the first time I had to share bad news, I'm kind of tap dancing around it. And finally he said, just put it on the table and get it out of the way. And so I did. And I go in for my next meeting with him and he says, well, what kind of problems are you having? I thought, oh, geez. I said, I don't want to be the guy that comes in here every 2 weeks and gives you my problems. And he says, okay, stop. He said, back up. He said, as your leader, it's my job to help you problem solve. It's my job to block and tackle for you. It's my job to help you knock down those barriers. He said, I only want about 5 or 10 minutes of this meeting where you're talking about all the good stuff you're doing, because I know you're doing good stuff. That's why I hired you. He said, bring those things to me that I can help you do. He said that we can bounce ideas off of each other, share the problems with me. And that's something that's always stuck with me that I've kind of carried on as I've moved into leadership is no, it's my job to help you with this. And it really reminded me of a quote. I read something from Colin Powell years ago. And Colin Powell said, when your leaders stop bringing problems to you, that's when you've stopped becoming their leader. And that's always resonated with me with how I respond to problems, because as a leaders, that is our job, right? To help our teams and our leadership get through the problems.
That's a good one. Yeah. Mine was way more practical. I just thought I was blown away, and I have dealt with a lot of boards, but having the CEO private session at the beginning, because the ones I've interacted with, the CEO session is at the end. So having it at the beginning made so much sense to me. And then maybe there's one at the end also, but I just loved that idea. Mm-hmm. So, and then focusing on forward, not spending, half a day on what already happened in the past. Okay, 2 more. So the fifth one that one was on the board. The fifth one is on the stakeholders and connecting with the stakeholders. That's the responsibility of the CEO. And the mindset is start with why. So Dave, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, again, I had a vice president ask me this a long time ago when I was trying to pitch a new project that, of course, required more funding. I needed several more FTEs and resources, hardware, all that stuff. And he just kind of paused and looked at me for what seemed like 30 minutes. It was probably more like 10 seconds. And finally, he said, how do you justify this spend to our shareholders? And I didn't have an answer. And he just kind of looked at me and cocked his head and he goes, come back tomorrow when you have that answer. And I had never been challenged to think that way before, but ultimately we do have to think about that, our shareholders. And the CEO of the company I worked for a long time ago, one thing he said in a company-wide meeting was, there's a lot of groups of people I care about. He said, our employees, our clients, and also our shareholders. And he goes, I assure you, they all want different things, and I've got to balance all of that out. So those 2 things kind of came rushing back to me as I read this section.
Nice. Thank you. Bret?
There was a piece in this part called Show Personal Resilience. And it's amazing how these stories just come. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So the CEO was sharing with me a point in the development of the company where, they were moving into a new facility and literally, and I remember this because I was a supplier to the company at the time, and they were working 20 hours a day. They were sleeping in the building on cots. And it was literally an all hands on deck type of event. And I, like I said, I literally lived this with the company as a supplier. And he shared with how some of his first team basically came to him and they were completely exhausted. They had lost all their passion, all their drive, and they were literally at the breaking point and were faced with the possibility of literally failing to ship to their customers, which in our business is, catastrophic. And the CEO, being the guy that he is, gathered himself and says, guys, I got this, right? I can see the finish line. We're close. And because he didn't break in what was a point where most people would, the first team looked at him and they played off of his energy. They played off of his confidence, and they all basically, slapped some water on their face and they went back out and met really the rest of the team. And because their body language had changed because the energy that they brought changed, they were able to persevere through. And ultimately, the fact that I'm sitting here in the role that I am is testimony to the success that they actually found. So, much like Dave's story from last month, this is one of those stories that I'm sure I will remember for the rest of my life. And I'm passionate about it, obviously, because now I'm part of the story. But, to hear it in firsthand in the first voice from a man who lived it, it didn't bring me to tears, but I mean, it literally gave me goosebumps to hear it, because you can hear the passion in it. And the point of this part was show personal resilience, and his resilience is literally what brought the team through was probably one of the darkest and most challenging times in the history of the company. So as I read it, and I don't know how you guys read, but when I'm reading, I'm thinking of people, I'm thinking of stories, I'm thinking of experiences, and immediately my mind, and I had to kind of pull my head back to the pages because, I was reading the words, but they weren't sticking. And I, clear the fog, get back to what you're doing. But, obviously this really resonated with me and left a mark.
Awesome. What you just shared reminded me of what's happening right now with Twitter. And, wouldn't Mr. Elon Musk would benefit from talking to your leader that was able to, and they talk in the book about instilling hope, like working all these long hours, sleeping in the office. Nobody wants to do that for burnout.
Nope.
Or for the CEO to recoup his $40 billion investment, but
Right.
they do it for a bigger purpose, something else. So this section also went into crisis management. What hit me on this section about the stakeholders was all about purpose. So that's another thing I've worked with a lot of organizations on. And they had one piece of data, 82% of companies understand and affirm the need for purpose now, but 42% say theirs doesn't have any effect. So there's some work to be done in that. Okay, the last one is the personal effectiveness, and managing your personal effectiveness. And so the mindset is do what only you can do. I think they kind of went into burnout on this one too. Brett, do you want to go from this one?
Sure. There was a section in the book where they talk about really only doing what you can do. And what was interesting is all these best in class CEOs talked about exercising and diet and re-energizing. And you really, all the CEOs, and I know they really do those things. It's amazing with the burden of the schedule that they have. They do find time to exercise. And my point is, hey, we're talking about CEOs, and there's some listeners on the call that are saying, hey, I'm not a CEO, but that doesn't apply to me. And I would say, au contraire, mon frère. So the message that I deliver, and I was coaching one of my direct reports the other day, and he said, I want to do bigger things. I've got an appetite for more responsibility. And I just looked at him and I said, start now. And he looked at me kind of, funny. And I said, if you want to do those things, start acting like that today. If you want people to think of you in that role and see you in that role, start. The electricity's going on and off here. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you haven't moved around.
Yeah, think about that today. So the other thing is embracing servant leadership. So. And again, this is one of my blind spots. I'm not as focused and as good at this as I should be. And so the one thing that I thought of is I'm doing my, what I call listening tour, being introduced to the company and doing my key leader one-on-ones. And what I've done is when I set up these meetings, rather than calling the people to my office, I'm going to their office.
Nice.
And I know that's subtle. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's personifying the type of leader that I want to be. I could easily say, hey, you know what? You're coming to my office and we're going to meet on my terms. The other thing that I focused on is I have a small meeting table in my office. And when people come into my office, I could easily stay behind my desk and sit in my big chair, but I don't. I get out from my table, out from my desk, and I go around and I meet people where they are at the meeting table and make it more personal, and it makes it more of a one-on-one conversation. So those are the two things that I thought of as servant leadership, and then, how these CEOs all do practice this exercising and infusing energy.
Yeah, that's nice. My last role in a corporation was as a chief talent officer, and same thing with a little table on the side, and I'd always go over there, and people always seemed surprised by that. Like, no, we can sit across from each other over there, Yeah.
Dave, and these things don't cost you anything, right? And it personifies the type of leader that you want to be.
Right.
And like I said, they're subtle and they're small, but I do believe they make a difference.
Yeah, I think so too. Dave, what about you on that chapter?
So another good chapter as well. What kind of reminded me here was I had a student that graduated. I can't remember how many years ago, but she had reached out and said, would you coach me? Would you kind of help guide me? I want to make my way into management. And I said, yeah, absolutely. A bright young individual. She had a ton of potential, and she had been in her role, I think, about 9-10 months, and we had a call, and she was really frustrated. She was completely overwhelmed, and I said, well, what's going on? And she goes, well, I've got people coming at me from different directions. I'm continually working more and more hours. And I said, well, what about the rest of your team? Well, they're not working as many hours. And I said, well, who scopes the work? Well, I kind of do. And I said, well, I want you to go read the book, The Art of Saying No. And she did. And we got back together a month later, and she says, I get it. She said, all of these other people are saying no to some of these requests and focusing on what is, on the critical path, what the core things are. And she said, it really has helped me to understand and deliver this message of, I really want to help you out with this project, but if I say yes, I can't do it as well as I'd like to. I can't get it done in the time frame that you want it done. So, I think we spend a lot of time saying yes to things in the organization. And I work with a guy in my job that's real good about asking this question. Anytime something comes down from on high of, hey, let's go do this. We've got to go do this now. His question always is, what are we going to stop doing? Because we can't do it all. And that's usually met with crickets when that question comes up. So, that's kind of what I got. And Bret, as you fade in and out of the light for moments, it looks like you're in witness protection. So I think a voice changer on you to go with it. So yeah,
I love it. Those were good to me as well, and I think those are good takeaways for any business owner, because we can get into scope creep. We want to serve customers. We like what we're doing. We want to serve, so we say yes to everything instead of yes, and that will increase the retainer fee by X, or the deadline by 2 weeks or whatever. But speaking up and advocating. I loved in this section talking about infusing energy into your routine on purpose.
Yeah.
So that's something that when I, as an executive coach, all of my clients have to have a morning routine. So that's a requirement. So even if they're not coming to me about that, but that's a requirement. So I don't tell them what it has to be or anything, but most of them include some kind of movement and some kind of reading and or journaling, and but just something to center yourself in the truth of who you are. So you bring that into the decisions and everything else that you have for the day, so that you're able to be a servant leader and have gratitude that they talk about in there as well. And this was the section also continuing to grow.
But when I have a note here, we didn't get to it, but seek to continuously grow. Marshall Goldsmith 101, right?
Yeah.
Even CEOs have coaches, and what got you here won't get you there. So
that's right.
That's exactly it. Right
on. Well, that went through the 6 responsibilities of CEOs and the 6 mindsets. At the very end, they give a little section about they thought they would see patterns of behaviors, so that all the CEOs, when they were faced with this type of challenge, the top CEO or the best CEOs took this same step. And that wasn't what the authors found. They didn't take the same step, but they often asked the same questions. So again, it wasn't on the exact, they had, their behaviors were the same, even though their decisions might have been different, but they asked the same questions in a lot of those. I thought that was really interesting. So And then the very last thing they talked about was the best CEOs of the future will be ethically accountable, diverse, resilient, and impactful. So taking all of these things from history and from experience, and then applying that to the needs of the future. And one of the last sentences in the book on page 300, the best CEOs help others achieve things they never imagined they'd be able to do.
Yeah.
I just love that. Like, can't all leaders do that? Help people achieve things beyond what they think they can do. Just amazing. Well, thank you guys for the conversation, and as always. And our December conversation will be the 15th. And then going into 2023, we're back on the fourth Thursday of every month at 4 o'clock Central Time. And we still need to pick December's book. So we'll post that in the next few days. And I think that is it. So anything else from you guys?
You know, I just had an incredible month, as everybody probably can tell from the call. I'm so energized, and I keep finding I get more and more and more out of these calls, or out of these conversations rather. So, you know, hopefully everybody that's listening, you know, is equally as energized and inspired to keep reading, keep investing in yourself. It's the best investment that you'll ever make. And you know, I always look for this because we did, you know, kind of put this together as our rally cry. You know, what is our why? And it's to inspire the leaders of tomorrow to invest in themselves today. Just keep investing, keep reading, keep doing good work. You know, hope that you can join us for future calls, but just so excited to continue to share the journey with everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Dave, any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, just, you know, you two have both, you know, have and are functioning in, you know, various C-level capacities where I'm not, but I would still say this is definitely a book for everybody. You know, one thing I always try to do, you know, as a worker is understand, you know, my leader. And, you know, I always like to ask those questions, you know, of my leader, things like what drives you. A question I always like to ask is what pisses you off? Because I'd really like to not do that in the first 2 or 3 months of my employment.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
good thinking.
So I came at this from maybe a slightly different lens, but I definitely still took away a lot of trying to understand leaders and understanding what makes them think and all of that. So yeah, great read. Definitely a little longer than last month, but yeah, definitely one worth looking at.
Yay.
Dave, kudos to you for being self-aware to ask that question. You know,
Yeah.
the traditional mindset is, you know, hey, he's got to adapt to me, or he's going to take me for what I am, or, you know, he's going to like me for who I am. And, you know, you being who you are, of course, you know, and I wouldn't expect any less, but that's a very bold step on your part. And, you know, I'm kudos for you. I don't want to say I'm proud of you. That sounds condescending, but, you know, I wouldn't have expected any less from you. That's really cool.
Well, to be honest, I learned the hard way. I had a leader pretty early on that when I had my annual performance evaluation, he spent the whole time talking about all these things I did really well. And I said, well, what can I improve on? And he goes, you know, you're doing great. And I said, okay, thanks. And I went to stand up and he goes, well, hang on. There's one little thing you do that I really don't care for. And I said, oh my gosh, how long has this bothered you? And he goes, ever since day one. And I said, well, gosh, tell me. So yeah, I always start that conversation with every leader and saying, you know, I've got tough toes. Don't worry about stepping on them as long as it's constructive. I want to know, you know, how we can work better together. So yeah, I did. Trial and error.
Oh, that's good.
Feedback's priceless.
Yep.
They talked about that in the book too, about thick skin.
Yep.
Right. That comes with the role. So yay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today, for watching this. And we look forward to sharing more on the leadership journey in the future. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.